I think in the corporate world, perhaps unlike the public sector, we're still in a period where taking sustainability and ESG seriously is still very nascent. And the structural changes that have begun to be put in place in corporates in terms of appointing chief sustainability officers really has not yet slid over to what happens in boards. And as you've alluded to, I've written about what the role of a chief sustainability officer is, in my view, on the executive side, which is essentially to be, if I can be cute about it, the integrator in chief. In the case of the board, boards are now beginning to move to create cyber committees. And even some of them are beginning to put together and establish sustainability committee. If you believe, as I do, that sustainability is integral to business transformation, there really will come a time where I think you'll find boards establishing sustainability committees. And perhaps, maybe this is a dream, but perhaps just like on the financial side, having qualified experts be members of boards who are experts in sustainability. And I think the point that really is not well understood, frankly, is it's not just the risks of sustainability, but it's the benefits that are engendered by companies that become more sustainable. And if you think of sustainability in terms of maximizing the long-run growth of a corporation, in my view, that means the long-run growth and benefits accruing and minimization of risks engendered by all of the stakeholders in the corporate ecosystem. So it's not just a question of sustainability means growth and profit maximization privately from a corporate perspective, but those benefits all across the board and across the entire ecosystem. And I think one of the differential factors I think also needs to be paid attention to is, unlike financial audits, and I come from a world where I used to work at PwC, although I'm not an auditor, financial auditors by definition are backward looking. When we're getting into the world of ESG, of disclosure, and ESG in terms of actually imputing it to the way companies should grow, we're going to be asking for, and should be mandated for, companies to disclose forward-looking, not just what did you do in the last period, but what are you doing now, and what are your plans for the future. And I think that's one of the seminal differences between financial audits and ESG or sustainability disclosures. And I think conflating those two, I think, it is a big mistake. It doesn't mean that one is better than the other, but they're very different tools and methods and optics. So I think that those are the kinds of issues that I think are still quite nascent in the corporate world, both in the C-suite and in the board. And I hope with you, Carolyn, and the work that we're doing with the ESG Exchange, this is the kind of set of issues that we're going to help propel. Having a harmonization of principles is extraordinarily important, and you can look, in other domains where corporates and public sector interact. Think about trade policy, think about investment policy. There's agreements of principles, whether it's reciprocity, whether it's transparency and the like. And then the question is, if we get that far, which I hope we will in terms of sustainability, as you say, Carolyn, the question then is, how do you execute on those principles? And I think that's where the rubber, meets the road. And I think one of the drivers of that process, apart from an administrative process, is the capital markets. Because capital markets are continually judging how corporates are behaving, how are they conducting their business with respect to ESG and sustainability, for better or for worse. So that is a power that has yet to be fully unleashed, and that's going to allow for, I would say, a double clicking on the principles to get to actual actions. And what that means, I think, for C-suites and boards is to be able to have a robust interaction between the boards and the executives. And I think, again, I refer to sort of cybersecurity, which is another sort of new area that to boards and to C-suites. The question is, from a structural perspective, who do you have in charge in the executive side, and who do you have in charge at the board? And borrowing also from cybersecurity, When boards look at cyber issues, cyber risk, they're very intimidated about asking the right kinds of questions and rigorous questions of management, in large part because they don't understand cyber. They think it's too scientific and so forth. And so the conversation at board meetings about cyber tends to be dumbed down. My worry is the same is going to happen in sustainability. And so one of the things that I'm working on, I think I've mentioned this to you privately, is another column in Forbes about what are the questions, what are the pragmatic questions the boards of directors have to ask management about sustainability. And it's not just a question of, how did you go about doing your disclosure reports, but what are you actually doing, Mr. and Mrs. CEO, about integrating into your operations sustainability issues. And I think we need to have that kind of conversation, robust conversation, taking place in the boardroom. Again, we're beginning to sort of get there in the cyberspace, but I think we're too far away from doing so in the ESG and sustainability space. And so I think once all the stakeholders realize that we're all in this boat together, and the capital markets are driving this, where the boat goes and whether or not the boat is going to continue to float, that should be a powerful incentive for all stakeholders to begin to embrace these principles of sustainability, and not just embrace them, but drive them to implementing actions that are actually going to make an improvement for future generations and even ourselves, the current generation. I think the role of capital markets is going to be felt in the boardroom. I mean, it's going to be felt certainly in the C-suite, but I think if you think about this entire ecosystem of where are the pain points, right? At some point, just as we're seeing now in cyber, boards cannot shy away from asking questions that have an effect on the balance sheets over which they're overseeing. And so if capital markets are doing their thing, if activists are doing their thing, you're going to find some pressure on boards to begin to ask, sort of the right questions. But I think we all agree that, and this happens on boards in which I sit, where someone at a board meeting will say a particular acronym and people just nod their head yes or no and so forth. And I know I've had this experience. You can tell I'm not shy about asking questions. And I remember at one board meeting several years ago, I raised my hand. I said, "Listen, I don't understand what this acronym means." And I got a very nice response from the CEO. And afterwards, a couple of the directors came up to me and said, "Thank you so much for asking that." And I'm thinking, really? I mean, this is what we're getting paid to do. And I think when there's outside pressure from capital markets, when there's outside pressure from other stakeholders, activists, and so forth, the regulators, hopefully that's going to bring to bear on the conversations in the boardroom as well as in the C-suite. Again, I'm not naive. This is not going to happen overnight, but I think we are beginning to see significant ways in different geographies and different sectors where this is beginning to have a binding effect. And I just hope that binding effect, grows stronger. I hope it becomes more widespread. And I think by having discussions like this, that are very disciplined, dispassionate, I think that will help, propel that kind of discussion in boardrooms and C-suites. The quality of the reporting, I don't want to say is everything, but where we are in the state of play, it's extraordinarily important. And the question is, what are the principles that we talked about? What are the rules that are guiding, usually from the public sector, about these disclosure requirements? But again, let's not fool ourselves. Disclosure is it's a necessary condition, but it's not sufficient. And the question is, how do you actually integrate, to overuse the word that we've been talking about, but how do you operationalize what you've disclosed? And again, that's why I make this point that the disclosures cannot just be backward looking. They've got to be forward looking in terms of sustainability as well. And once these are disclosed and made public, then that's going to, really foster this checks and balances in a systemic, kind of way. And I think we're getting there. And I hope, entities like the ESG Exchange can help sort of motivate that.